Hello, everyone. Nice to have you with us here again today for another cultural conversation. And today we are very happy to have Avvy go with us. If I may, Avvy, thank you very much for joining us today for this discussion
Thank
on
you for
perceptions.
thank you for having me.
A pleasure. So if I may just give a very brief introduction about Justice Avvy. I believe that you emigrated from Hong Kong to Canada probably when you were around 19. You also have done incredible work in law. You have, for example, been were a clinic director for the Chinese and Southeast Asian Legal Clinic in Toronto. You also were appointed in 2014 to the Order of Ontario. And just recently, in August of 2021, you have been appointed as a federal court judge. So you have a wonderful past and a lot of wonderful work that you've done, particularly with immigrants and refugees into Canada. Thank you for joining us. And maybe what I might start with is congratulations, first off, on your new appointment. And maybe you could tell us a little more about your journey. How did you get to where you are today? What inspired you to go into law? And has your family or the people around you, your culture in any way motivated you to go into law?
Well, thank you very much for having me again, and thank you for the warm introduction. And I also want to congratulate Saskatoon Open Door Society for having over 40 years of services to newcomers and refugees in your community. And I just want to also add that I'm speaking here today in my own capacity, not as a judge and not as a representative of the federal court. So in terms of how I got into law, I guess I wish I could tell you that I went into law because I wanted to, change the world, make it a better place, something inspirational like that. But in reality, I chose law at that time because it was just something that somebody else has suggested that I should do. I would like to think that my choice has inspired other women in my family to follow the same path.
That's wonderful. It appears it has done so. So that's very encouraging for women to pursue more careers in law. That's lovely. But I wanted to also learn maybe a little more about so you didn't really have a lot of expectations or a lot of perceptions on law, maybe even, in the process of going through the study to be a lawyer. I mean, were there any specific expectations or perceptions about law?
Not really. So at the time when I went to law school, I really had no expectation whatsoever about what a career in law would look like. Looking back, and I think really being at U of T in a way kind of helped me decide what I wanted to do with the law degree for myself. And I remember at that time, U of T was very not diverse, right? So there were very, very few students of color in my year. And so I remember I was going to an orientation program for the first year law students. And U of T, like other law schools, they had different student programs, to help law students learn more about the practice of law. But at the same time, the programs were also designed to help low-income clients. So one of the programs was a satellite clinic in Toronto's Chinatown for Chinese-speaking clients. And I'm fluent in both Cantonese and Mandarin. So I signed up to become a volunteer, right? And I did that for 2 years. I went down to the Chinatown clinic once a year, meet with the Chinese-speaking clients who came in. And I remember one of the first clients I met was this 84-year-old Chinese senior who walked with a cane. And she was charged with shoplifting. Like, at that time, maybe the older Canadians would remember back then we had a big department store called Eden's. And my client, as I mentioned, walked with a cane, went inside the Eden store to try to buy a shirt. She walked out like, it's like 84-year-old. She just wandered out into the mall itself with the thing that she wanted to buy. And she was charged with shoplifting. So I had to go to court with her. And the judge kind of took one look at her and she said and the judge asked me, how old is your client? I said, 84. And he said, absolute discharge. You can go home. So, that was just one of many stories that I kind of, sort of came across when I was working at that Chinatown clinic. And I realized that there are a lot of people who, because of their language barriers, had a lot of problems in accessing legal services. So I sort of decided at that time that I would somehow try to use my linguistic skills, my ability to speak Mandarin Cantonese, and combine with my legal knowledge to help these clients break down these barriers. So after I finished law school, I articled for a mid-sized firm in downtown, Bay Street firm. And after I finished article, I got a contract position working for a legal clinic at Toronto East End, worked there as a staff lawyer for about 6 months. I changed job to work for Parkdale Community Legal Services on the West End of Toronto, also as a staff lawyer. And when I was working at Parkdale, the position of the clinic director at the Chinese and Southeast Asian Legal Clinic became available. So that's when I decided to apply for that position and became the clinic director just 1 year after I became a lawyer. So I worked at that clinic until I got appointed to the court.
Now, let's flip it back to newcomers, immigrants and refugees. So, for example, taking the 84-year-old woman or other cases that you've had, what do you think their perception is? What could you tell them about the mandate of the federal court and the role of federal court judge is?
So the federal court, in Canada, there are different types of courts. Some of the courts, like federal court, is the judges who work for the federal court appointed by the federal government. So they are federally appointed judges. And then there are also provincial courts that these judges are appointed by the provincial government. The federal court itself was created on June 1st, 1971, and it was created under a federal statute called the Federal Court Act. So when it first started, the court itself has two branches, like there's the appeal division and then the trial division. And then in 2003, they separate out the two branches. So now we have a federal court and then separately a federal court of appeal. So in general, I would say that the federal court mandate is to hear cases that are sort of related to decisions that are made at the federal level. Could be the federal government, different federal boards, different federal commissions, different tribunals. So cases that are, sort of like that are related to the federal government or federal law.
Okay.
And so, for instance, many newcomers, they may have come to Canada after applying for immigration status. So the immigration law is a federal law. So you will see many cases that come before the federal court are related to immigration law. Similarly, there might be clients that are served by your agency that are convention refugees or people who are recognized as refugees from overseas. So refugee law is also part of what we would look at. So what I do, just like the other of my fellow judges of the federal court, we will hear matters that come before us, and we have to make a decision based on the law and based on the facts and evidence before us. So at a practical level, I will have to, like I'll review the materials so normally there will be two parties, one side versus the others. So the two parties will send the materials to the court. I will review the materials. I will conduct the hearing, and then I will make decisions. And my job is to make sure that the parties that appear before me, no matter who they are, and no matter whether they have a lawyer representing them, I have to make sure that they get a fair hearing, and I have to consider all the evidence and submissions that they make to me, and I have to deliver my decisions in a fair, impartial, and objective manner.
What do your clients or the people that you've worked with, what kind of perceptions do they have around social justice in Canada?
Right. So as I mentioned, so my whole career as a lawyer was limited to working in a legal clinic system. And so the clients that I worked with before as a lawyer, they were all low income. Yeah. They're all racialized. Many of them didn't speak any English at all, or they were not fluent in English. And that's why they came to ethno-racial community legal services like the one that I worked with. And they had lots of challenges when they were trying to navigate the legal system. So, for instance, many of the clients I worked with, they were, they worked in low-wage job. So they have very little, employment protection. And some of them may have come to Canada with various educational and professional experiences. But because those experiences were not being recognized, so they ended up working, in jobs like in factories or in restaurants, or in more recent years, the clients that went to the clinic, many of them worked in the gig economy, right? The food delivery workers, Uber drivers. Yeah. So when I was working there, I represented many clients who were unfairly treated by the employers. They didn't get the wages they were supposed to get under the provincial employment standard law. And because of their low income standards, they had other problems. For instance, they were more likely to be tenants, and they were being evicted by the landlords for one reason or another. So it depends on the client's experiences and their encounters with the legal system in Canada. Some of those experiences could reinforce their faith in the Canadian system of economy, but other times their trust in the Canadian system would be tested because of their own negative experiences as well. So I think their perceptions would be very much influenced by their actual experiences while in Canada.
Yes, very true. And the fact that you've had the languages to help them and make them give a sense of trust, because it can be so disorienting when laws, suddenly find you guilty and you don't really understand why, for example, and you can't navigate with the language, to solve things. I mean, in Saskatoon, we often see outside of the court, for example, a lot of people lined up who've just had basic traffic infractions. It takes, of course, they have their licenses. It's not that they don't know how to drive, but it's just that, simple little things that they wouldn't maybe take as seriously in their own cultures, maybe find them at the court for a small traffic infraction.
Right. So I would say that it's not so much a cultural issue, but I think it's just people in general, like a lot of, I think most Canadians don't know much about the law. But if you're
No,
in
we
a
don't. No, we
country,
don't. We don't. We don't. But it
yeah,
seems
but
that if you
if you
read the
have
book,
additional
yeah,
barriers, right?
yes,
So then you would not be able to know whether something would affect you, right? So
right.
I wouldn't say that it's a cultural issue. I think it's more
Okay.
access to appropriate information or
Right.
timely information. Yeah.
During COVID, right? We've seen in Saskatoon a case where a young Asian boy was knocked off his bike, bullied, because of his background, right? And
Mhm.
I just wonder, in a case like that, will the courts be fair and the law will be fair? I mean, there's issues in schools sometimes where children are bullied and it can be sort of gently pushed under the rug. Oh, they're just kids. Kids will be kids. Um, at some point, yes, that's acceptable. That at other points, it needs to be addressed, right? Would you like to talk about any of that, or would that be a
Sure.
little
Yeah.
too much?
There was a webinar that was organized by the basically it's the court support system for the federal court. They hosted a webinar to talk about anti-Asian racism. And
Yes,
so I helped to moderate the discussion. And one of the issues that came out was about the rise of anti-Asian racism, particularly during COVID. And incidents such as kids being attacked in school. They were told that you Chinese bring virus to Canada. Almost every single Chinese Canadian I know personally had experienced something like that during the COVID. I myself, when I was walking down the street in Toronto, that was sometime in 2000, I was spat at, right? So
yeah,
it is real, right? So it's a real experience that many Asian Canadians had experienced, particularly over the last several years. So I think it's important to talk about that. I want to recognize that, anti-Asian racism is still an issue that we need to address.
mhm,
And but I don't think it's an issue that is only for the court. I think it's up to all of us to speak up and also support others who may face discrimination, whether it's anti-Asian racism or other forms of discrimination, right? And I think organizations like yourself could also play a very important role, right? To promote, shared understanding of respect among all Canadians, among all people who live in Canada, right? And not only among the newcomers, but also old Canadians like myself, right? We all need to be
right.
reminded
Yes, we
uh,
do.
how important it is that we treat each other with respect, and uh, that we expect that we be treated equally, just like anybody else.
And that is a perfect note to end on. Thank you very much for discussing with us today your experiences, and we wish you all the best. And we are very, very proud to have you in the federal court and, to protect everyone's rights in a fair and equal and unbiased manner. So thank you again, Avvy. It's been a pleasure to speak to you today.
Thank you.